and welcome back for another deep dive. We love to go deep on these topics, and today we're diving into something that's been making headlines. It's a bit of a head-scratcher, to be honest.
Yeah.
We're talking about South Korea and their rising NEET population.
NEET.
NEET.
Yeah.
NEET. It stands for Not in Education, Employment, or Training.
Ah, okay. Got it.
So basically, we're talking about young people who are kind of like opting out of the whole traditional success path.
Yeah.
Schoolwork, all that jazz.
Yeah, makes sense. So what's the deal with South Korea specifically? I mean, isn't that like a super driven, high-achieving kind of place?
Exactly.
Okay.
You'd think so, right? I mean, that's kind of the stereotype we have, right?
Yeah.
But the numbers tell a totally different story, and that's what we're going to unpack today. We've got a really fascinating article from the Straits Times, and there's this super insightful YouTube video from Korea now that we're going to pull from. So yeah, we're going to look at all of that and see if we can answer this big question. Why are so many young South Koreans choosing to just sit this whole thing out?
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive in.
Okay, so first things first. We got to talk about the numbers because they are pretty mind-blowing. In July 2024, South Korea saw a record number of NEETs. And get this, we're talking 443,000 young people between the ages of 15 and 29. That's like 5.4% of their entire youth population.
Wow. That is a lot. And you said that's a record high.
Record high. For July, anyway. Yeah, it's been climbing steadily for a while. But this is a huge jump. And just to give you some context, back in the early 2010s, it was only hovering around 2%. So this is a pretty dramatic increase.
Definitely a big shift.
Yeah.
Do we know if this is just a South Korea thing or is it happening elsewhere too?
That's a good question,
Yeah.
and one we'll definitely explore. But first, I got to tell you about this other stat that really threw me for a loop. Over 75% of these NEETs aren't even looking for work.
Whoa, seriously? So it's not even just a case of, oh, I can't find a job.
Right. That's the part that's so perplexing. It's like there's this whole generation saying, nah, we're good. And that's when we got to figure out what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, it really challenges those assumptions we have about young people always being hungry for success. Like maybe there's a whole different set of values at play here.
Totally. And that's what's so fascinating about this deep dive. It's not just about economics. It's about culture. It's about psychology. It's about understanding a generation that's making different choices.
All right. So where do we start with those choices? What are some of the reasons these young people are giving for not working or studying?
Well, the articles and the video we looked at, they list a bunch of different reasons. But some of the biggies are lack of quality jobs, previous unsuccessful job searches, not enough education or experience, and just straight up lack of opportunities in their local areas.
It kind of sounds like a perfect storm of barriers. Like if one thing doesn't get you, another one will.
Exactly. It's not just one simple explanation.
Right.
And it's not just about laziness or anything like that. These are real obstacles that young people are facing, and it's leading them to make some unconventional choices.
Okay, so let's dig into those obstacles a bit more. You mentioned lack of quality jobs. What does that actually mean in this context?
Well, from what I gathered from the articles, it seems like a lot of NEETs who do want to work, they just feel like the jobs available aren't worth it.
Not worth it in what sense?
Like the pay's too low, the hours are too long, there's no work-life balance.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense. I mean, who wants to work themselves to the bone for peanuts?
Right. And it sounds like that's a big part of it. They're looking at the traditional work model and saying, no thanks. I'd rather do something else, even if it means not working at all.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me of that whole quiet quitting thing that's been going around. Like maybe it's not just about quitting your job, it's about quitting the whole rat race.
Maybe. And wouldn't that be a huge shift?
Yeah.
I mean, South Korea is known for its intense work culture. So to see young people pushing back against that,
Yeah,
it's definitely a sign of the times.
for sure. It suggests a real change in priorities and maybe a growing awareness of the importance of mental health and well-being, which is something we're seeing globally, right?
Absolutely. It's like people are waking up and realizing that there's more to life than just grinding away at a job you hate.
But here's the thing. If all this is true, if young people are prioritizing work-life balance and fulfilling work, does that mean the current job market in South Korea is just not cutting it?
Well, it's complicated. The government's actually claiming that the job market is strong. They're pointing to record high overall employment and super low unemployment rates in July 2024.
Wait, hold up. So on one hand, we've got all these NEETs saying, nope, not interested in working. And on the other hand, the government's like, everything's great, tons of jobs. How does that even make sense?
Yeah, it does seem kind of contradictory, doesn't it? Like two completely different realities.
Yeah.
But to understand what's going on, we got to look a little closer at how those statistics are calculated.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the catch?
Well, The employment rate and the unemployment rate, they're not measuring the same thing. The employment rate basically tells you how many people have jobs, period. But the unemployment rate only counts people who are actively looking for work. Ah, so NEETs, since they're not looking, they don't even factor into the unemployment rate.
Exactly. They fall through the cracks, statistically speaking. So even if the overall employment numbers look good, it doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening for specific groups like young people.
Got it. So we can't just rely on those big general statistics to get the whole picture. We need to look at the individual experiences and the specific challenges that different groups are facing.
Exactly. And the rising NEET numbers, they're a clear sign that something's not working, even if the government is trying to paint a rosy picture.
Okay, so if the government's saying the job market's booming, but we've got this growing NEET population, what are they actually doing to address this disconnect?
Well, to their credit, they're not completely ignoring the issue. In November 2023, they announced this big plan to throw a bunch of money at the problem, like almost $1 billion US.
Wow, $1 billion.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. What are they planning to do with all that cash?
From what I understand, the focus is on things like employment matching services and internship opportunities. You know, trying to connect young people with potential employers and give them some real-world work experience.
Okay, that sounds like a reasonable starting point, especially for NEETs who actually are looking for work. But is that enough? I mean, is it really going to solve the underlying issues that are pushing young people away from traditional employment in the first place?
That's the big question, isn't it? Is this just a Band-Aid solution, or are they actually addressing the root causes?
Yeah, because you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Right. So what about things like education reform or addressing income inequality? Those seem like pretty big factors in this whole NEET situation, don't they?
Absolutely. And there's always a risk with these kinds of interventions. Like, what if the focus is just on getting young people into any job, even if it's a dead-end job with terrible pay?
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. It's like we could be solving one problem, but creating another. Exactly. It's not just about putting people in jobs. It's about creating opportunities for them to find work that's meaningful, that pays a living wage, and that allows them to have a life outside of work.
Right. It's about creating a system where young people feel valued, where they feel like they have a chance to thrive, not just survive. And that's a much bigger challenge than just throwing money at the problem.
Couldn't agree more. This whole NEET situation, it's way more complex than it appears on the surface. It's not just about economics. It's about shifting cultural values. It's about societal expectations. It's about how we define success.
Exactly. And it's a conversation that's happening all over the world. We're seeing younger generations questioning the status quo, reevaluating their priorities, and demanding something different from the traditional work model.
It's a global shift, and it's a fascinating one to watch unfold.
You know, I can totally relate to that feeling of wanting something more from work.
I remember when I first started out, I took a few jobs that, looking back, weren't really aligned with my values or my long-term goals. It took me a while to figure out what I really wanted to do, what kind of work would make me feel both challenged and fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common experience, especially for young people. You're trying to figure out who you are, what you're good at, what you care about. And it takes time and experimentation to find that right fit.
Absolutely. And the challenge is to create a system that supports young people in that process of exploration, that provides them with the resources and opportunities they need to discover their passions and pursue meaningful work, whether that's in traditional employment entrepreneurship or something completely different.
Totally. It's about empowering them to shape their own futures, not forcing them into a mold that might no longer fit. Love that. Empowering them to shape their own futures. That should be the goal.
Right.
Not just trying to fit them into a system that's not working for them. So what does that look like in practice? What are some innovative solutions that could actually address this complex issue?
Well, I think we need to start thinking outside the box. Traditional job matching services and internships are a good first step, but we need to go beyond that. What about fostering entrepreneurship, creating more opportunities for remote work or flexible work arrangements? Investing in skills training that's relevant to the jobs of the future.
Those are great ideas. And it sounds like we need a multifaceted approach, something that addresses both the economic and social factors at play. It's not just about creating jobs. It's about creating a society where young people feel like they have a chance to thrive, to pursue their dreams, and to live meaningful lives.
Precisely. It's about fostering a culture of opportunity where young people feel supported and empowered to create their own paths to success, whatever that might look like for them.
This has been such an insightful conversation. We've gone from shocking statistics to deep philosophical discussions about the meaning of work and the future of society. It's a lot to unpack, but I think we've made some good progress in understanding the complexity of this NEET trend.
Definitely. We've highlighted the fact that this is a multifaceted issue with no easy answers. It requires a collaborative effort between governments, businesses, educational institutions, and young people themselves. And of course, we need to keep the conversation going. This is just the beginning.
Okay, so we've explored the why behind this rising NEET trend in South Korea. We've looked at the economic factors, the cultural shifts, and the government's response. But now I want to bring it back to you, our listener. What does this all mean for you? Think about it. What are your takeaways from this conversation? What resonates with you? And what are your thoughts on the solutions we've discussed? Because this isn't just a South Korean problem. It's a global trend that's raising important questions about the future of work and the role of young people in society.
And we want to hear your perspective. So leave us a comment, send us an email, or join the conversation on social media. Let's keep this dialogue going.
Because ultimately, shaping a better future starts with each of us asking those tough questions, engaging in these conversations and working together to find solutions. And that's what this deep dive is all about.
So keep those brains buzzing, folks, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See ya.
Well, to be fair to them, they haven't just ignored it. In November 2023, they announced this plan to basically inject a ton of money into programs for NEETs, like almost $1 billion US.
Okay, so $1 billion. That sounds like they're at least taking it kind of seriously. But what are they actually going to do with all that money?
The plan seems to be focusing on a couple things, mainly employment matching services and internship opportunities. So the idea is to connect young people with employers and give them some actual work experience, get their feet wet.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially for NEETs who are looking for work. But I'm wondering, is that really going to be enough? Like, will it really address the root causes that are pushing young people away from traditional employment in the first place?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Is this just a quick fix? Or are they actually going to tackle those deeper issues?
Right, because you can't just force people into jobs that they don't want or that don't meet their needs. So what about things like education reform or addressing income inequality? Those seem like pretty big factors in this whole NEET situation, too.
For sure. And there's always a risk that these interventions could backfire. Like, what if they just focus on getting young people into any job, even if it's a dead-end job with terrible pay and no future? We could end up just creating a whole new set of problems.
Oh, totally. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
It's like we could be solving one problem, but creating another one in the process.
Exactly. It's not just about filling job openings. It's about creating opportunities for young people to find work that's meaningful, that pays a decent wage, and that allows them to have a life outside of work.
Right. It's about quality of life. It's about creating a system where young people feel valued and feel like they have a real chance to thrive.
Couldn't agree more. This whole NEET situation, it's not just about economics. It's about so much more. It's about cultural values. It's about societal expectations. It's about how we define success as a society.
Totally. And it's something that's happening all over the world. This isn't just a South Korea thing. We're seeing young people everywhere questioning the status quo, reevaluating their priorities, and demanding something different from the traditional 9-to-5 grind.
It's a global shift. And it's a fascinating one to watch unfold.
I can totally relate to that feeling of wanting something more from work.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first started out, I took a few jobs that, looking back, weren't really a good fit for me. It took me a while to figure out what I was really passionate about and what kind of work would make me feel fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common experience for young people. You're trying to figure out who you are, what you're good at, what you care about.
Yeah.
And that takes time and experimentation.
Absolutely. And it would be great if there was a system that actually supported young people in that process of exploration, instead of just pushing them to get any job they can.
Totally. It's about empowering them to find their own path, not forcing them into a mold that doesn't fit them anymore.
Empowering them to find their own path. I love that.
Yeah.
That should be the goal, right? So what does that actually look like in practice? What are some concrete steps we could take to support young people in finding meaningful work?
Well, I think we need to get creative. Traditional job matching services and internships are a good starting point, but we need to go beyond that. What about encouraging entrepreneurship? Or creating more opportunities for remote work and flexible work arrangements. Maybe even invest in skills training for those cutting-edge jobs of the future. The ones that don't even exist yet.
Those are all great ideas. And it sounds like we need to be thinking holistically about this. addressing both the economic factors and the social factors. It's not just about creating jobs. It's about creating a society where young people feel like they have a chance to thrive, to pursue their passions, and to live a good life.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of opportunity, where young people feel supported and empowered to create their own definition of success, whatever that may be.
I love this conversation. We've gone from these crazy statistics to these really deep philosophical questions about the meaning of work and the future of society. It's a lot to process, but I think it's so important that we're having these discussions.
For sure. This is a multifaceted issue with no easy answers. It requires a lot of different people working together: governments, businesses,
Yeah.
educational institutions, and of course, young people themselves. It's going to take all of us to figure this out.
Okay, so we've explored the reasons behind this rising NEET trend in South Korea. We've talked about the economics, the cultural shifts, the government's response, but now I want to turn it over to you, our listener. What does this all mean for you? What are your takeaways from this conversation?
So we've really dug deep into this whole NEET thing, haven't we? And it's clear that it's not just some simple trend. It's a reflection of these bigger changes that are happening in society, like how we view work, what we value, and what it means to have a successful life.
Yeah, and it's easy to look at those statistics and just think, oh, that's just South Korea. But I think there's a lot here that resonates with people all over the world. Those feelings of disillusionment with the traditional work model, the desire for more meaning and purpose in our lives.
Yeah.
It's something a lot of people are struggling with.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a reminder that we can't just rely on those big picture economic indicators to understand what's really going on. We need to look at the individual stories, the lived experiences of real people, and try to understand the choices they're making. Absolutely. And that's where I think this conversation gets really interesting, because we've talked about the problem, we've looked at the different perspectives, but now it's time to start thinking about solutions. And that's where you, our listener, come in.
Yeah. Let's flip the script for a second. Imagine you're in charge. You're the one who has to tackle this NEET trend. What would you do? Where would you even begin?
There's no easy answer, is there? It's a complex issue with a lot of different factors at play, but that's what makes it so interesting. To me, anyway. It's a puzzle that needs to be solved, and it's going to require some creative thinking.
Totally. So let's brainstorm a bit. We talked about the government's response, but is that enough? What other approaches could we try? What about direct cash assistance? Would that be more effective than job matching programs?
It's hard to say, right? There are pros and cons to every approach, and it probably depends on the individual circumstances. But that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to explore different ideas and to see what works.
Right. And what about those deeper issues like income inequality? Could tackling those things help to create a more equitable society where everyone has a chance to succeed?
I think it's definitely worth considering. If we want to create a system that works for everyone, we need to make sure that the playing field is level, that everyone has access to the same opportunities.
Makes sense. So we've got a lot to think about,
Yeah.
a lot of potential solutions to explore. But the first step is awareness, right? Recognizing that there's a problem and that it's not just some far-off issue that doesn't affect us. This is something that's happening right now all over the world. And it's something that we all need to be paying attention to.
Absolutely. The more we understand about these complex issues, the better equipped we are to find solutions and to create a future where everyone has a chance to thrive.
So keep those brains buzzing, folks. And if you want to dive deeper into this topic, there are tons of resources available online. Just search for things like NEETs, youth unemployment, future of work. You'll find a whole world of information out there.
And don't forget to share your thoughts with us. We want to hear your perspective, your ideas, your solutions. Let's keep this conversation going.
Because ultimately, creating a better future starts with each of us. Asking the tough questions, engaging in meaningful dialogue, and working together to find solutions. That's what this deep dive has been all about.
So thanks for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into a fascinating